Excellent. Okay, so recording has started. Share this screen again. And I think we're good to go. So welcome everyone. This is the Cross Creek Road Traffic Calming Meeting 1. It's November 30th, and we're here virtual only at 5:30 p.m. My name is David Greaves. I work with NDOT to handle a lot of these projects on a consultant firm. And also on the phone is Ellie Finn.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellie Finn. I work with David. I'm going to be helping him on this meeting, just monitoring the chat. If you guys have any questions, making sure everything gets answered.
Yeah, and to that point, we're going to cover a good amount of information tonight. I'll pause a few times to solicit questions, but if you would prefer to just type it into the chat, that's also fine too. Just whatever works for you. And we'll go ahead and just jump right in. So Traffic Calming in Nashville, it's a program that focuses on residential streets primarily. So we don't really do this on big arterial roads, certainly not freeways. It's really more to
a little bit later. Is that okay?
Address concerns on like neighborhoods.
Someone is talking. I can't hear.
Oh, huh.
It's okay.
We hear fine.
Sorry. So can people hear what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll just go ahead and charge ahead. So generally we favor physical solutions. So rather than like posting up speed limit signs, things like that, we try to go for options that physically disrupt like speeding traffic, kind of non-optional, generally things like speed cushions, speed humps, all of that. And the primary goal is speed reduction. So we don't really set out to divert traffic off of a street or onto another one. Really, we're just hoping to install measures that will slow cars down to a speed appropriate for the context. So in traffic calming, there are 3 E's. Those are education, enforcement, and engineering. Education is kind of what we're doing here now, just sort of making sure everyone is aware of what the program is. Different. I'm sorry, what was that?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Enforcement, that is mainly handled by Metro Nashville Police Department. We've all been familiar with speeding tickets, things like that. And then engineering, that is bold and underlined here because that's really what we're here to do. Engineering is kind of the big tool in NDOT's toolbox when it comes to how people interact with our transportation infrastructure. So this program leans very heavily on design and engineering solutions to problems rather than depending on enforcement and education to do all the work. So this slide really is just sort of to explain why we're so concerned with reducing speeds, and ultimately it comes from a safety perspective. So this graphic here is from the National Transportation Safety Board from 2017, but basically they did a large study of accidents and observed that there was a pretty high rate of survival if a pedestrian was struck at like around 25, but that drops off pretty severely as speeds increase to that 35, 45 mile an hour level. So where people have their houses, where they might be walking or biking or just living their lives, we really prefer for cars to not be going, those more highway-like speeds just because of that potential danger. This is a really popular program. So you all were selected in February of 2023. That was way earlier this year. And there were 464 applications on the books at that time. There's now over like 500, I think. So more people are signing up every day. But we only selected 26 for this kind of 6-month period. which means that Cross Creek Road rose to the top of a pretty long list of folks who had asked for this treatment. There are a number of things that you can ask for outside of the Nashville traffic calming program. So Hub Nashville is a really good spot for kind of anything like miscellaneous requests about signs, signals, crosswalks, sidewalks, things blocking the road, trash, you name it, they do it all. So we would just like to plug this before we kind of go into exactly what we're doing so that everyone knows if there's an issue that we're not planning on covering tonight, there are other places that can help out. So before we dig into some more specifics about Cross Creek Road, does anyone have any questions about what we covered so far?
David, just a quick question. I'm still seeing the title slide. Is that where you're on, or
no?
Maybe.
Interesting.
If that's just on my end, continue, and we'll.
Yeah, no,
I'll
it's on your end, Ben, because I'm seeing it.
Okay, perfect.
Got it. Sorry about that, Ben.
Nope, keep rolling.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. So I mentioned that y'all had risen to the top of a pretty long list. We wanted to just dig into a little bit of detail and talk about how we score streets and a little bit of why, in case anyone has questions about that. But essentially, the two biggest pieces of the pie are vehicle speeds and volumes. The main reason for that is those are the two items that generate risk of crashes. So if you have a lot of people driving down the road, there's a higher chance if you were walking on it that one of them might strike you, or the faster vehicles are going, the more harmful that's going to be, like we discussed earlier. Those three other pieces, we do consider a few other things. So vulnerable user injury or fatality. So if we did have a street where a pedestrian was struck and hurt, or God forbid they were killed, that would add a pretty good chunk of points to your score. And mainly because if we have an accident that's already happened, we're pretty confident that we'll be able to do something and it will have a positive effect. And then non-driver accommodations, that's if you had a sidewalk on Cross Creek, which you all don't, we try to install traffic calming where there aren't other options. So that 10% of the scoring just sort of factors in, like, if you can only walk on the street, if you're wanting to walk somewhere, like, we'll want to make sure that that road is as safe as can be. And then trip destinations, that's schools and parks. So essentially anything that we think has a higher likelihood of like generating pedestrian trips. So people walk to school, people walk to parks. We want to consider that and just sort of roll that context into our scoring. So Cross Creek Road, you all had a pretty high speed and a very high volume. So 3,335 trips. That was all in one day. I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to any of y'all who live on the street. I'm guessing you just watch cars go by all day long. But that is quite high, and I think it just has to do with the shape of y'all's road network. Like, it seems to be a route that leads to a lot of things. But yeah, 38 is the 85th percentile speed. So that's not an average. It's kind of like the median, but sent up to like 85. Another way of saying it is 15% of the people measured on Cross Creek were going faster than 38, and 85 were going slower than 38. So that's just kind of a traffic engineering metric that goes into that scoring system. As y'all know, y'all have a pretty narrow street, so 22 feet, that's really just those two lanes. So there's not a lot of room to mess around with a whole lot else. I'm guessing y'all don't have a lot of people parking on the street, I hope.
He needs to sit on the chair there.
No.
Sit right there.
Got it. But yeah, basically, these are some of the factors that went into why y'all were chosen to have traffic calming. This is the map. So the application was from Valley Brook Road to Sugar Tree Road. That's the entire street. Y'all have a nice and short one. And I will give my compliments. I think that this is probably the highest percentage of residents on a meeting that we've gotten so far, just because it is a pretty limited group that will be directly affected by this. So any questions about that before we dive into kind of the traffic calming programs toolkit and some of the options we have for the street?
Not any
I have a question for you. You
Sure.
mentioned about 3,800. What date, what period of time is that? What date is that?
Oh, I don't know the date off the top of my head. It would have been within the 6-month period after the application for Cross Creek was submitted. One of you might know when that application went in. I don't. I could look it up, but basically we have a company that does traffic counts come out and set up some equipment to measure a few days worth of data and basically use that.
Okay.
I don't have a question, but just a very quick comment that I'm not the least bit surprised with the volume count, a little surprised or quite surprised that even more people weren't driving faster than 38, because I can stand out in my front yard at any given moment and see people that I know are doing 50 plus coming down the street, but it is what it is.
No, like I said, that 85th percentile mark, that's not really the whole picture. Like if I went and drove 70 miles an hour down Cross Creek Road 10 times, it wouldn't really have an effect on that because it's sort of just out on the edge of that distribution. But anyway, yeah, when we get that feedback, and we actually do get it a lot, I'm compelled to just reassure everyone, you've been selected, so you've hopped over the bar, and we'll get something installed should you all choose to proceed with it.
Right.
Okay. Well, with that, I can move on to the toolkit that we have. Those who drive around Nashville's neighborhood will not be surprised that speed cushions are kind of NDOT's preferred method. There's a few advantages to these over other options that I want to highlight. And basically, it's that they're modular rubber devices, so they're very consistent. They are easy to maintain. Should one get broken, we can replace it pretty easily. And the thought is that they go in pretty quickly relative to like doing an asphalt or a concrete type project. The reason that they're split up into cushions rather than a whole like speed hump across the road is to reduce the impact to emergency vehicles. The thought there is that things like fire trucks and ambulances generally have wheelbases that are on the wider side of things. So when they go over these, they kind of hit those edges of the cushions and they don't get that full 3-inch bump. Whereas a smaller vehicle, you kind of have to either hit it head on and you'll go over the cushion, or it's harder to maneuver around it, or theoretically impossible to maneuver around it. They are only 3 inches high. I know that kind of sometimes comes as a surprise to people who have driven over them. They're 6 feet wide. That's really driven by that wheelbase constraint. And then there's a few different options for length. We generally try to pick one that is going to have the desired effects. So if it's a really dense kind of a grid-like environment, and we want people to be going slow, 7 feet is sort of that default option. 10.5 and 14, you still get the full bump, but it's more of a gradual up and down. So those we use on kind of collectors or places where you have a lot in a row. And that's really just to calm traffic, but not be so obnoxious about it if it's a scenario where that's not really desired. There are also speed tables. You'll see these around Nashville. They work the same way. You know, you go up 3 inches, you come down at the other side. Like I mentioned before, we generally don't prefer these. They're pretty massive, so it's a little bit more of an ordeal to install, and they do have the same effect as on like emergency vehicles as they might on cars. So we try not to put those you know, on routes where we might imagine an emergency vehicle would go. Really, they're mainly only considered when you have like a dead end kind of cul-de-sac situation where you know, you don't have a lot of network traffic cutting through. This is a study that NDOT did. It's a little limited in its sample size, but essentially they wanted to verify that all this work they were doing was having the intended effect. So in Nashville, they took some data and observed that the before and after speeds did reduce quite a bit. So the average was 31 down to 22, and then that 85th that came down from 37 to 25, averaged over those few streets. Outside of vertical measures, there's a few kind of other more fringe options that we pull out in certain situations. Radar feedback signs are one. Basically, these, I mean, I'm sure that we've seen these before, but it'll flash at you if you're speeding and let you know what your speed is. These tend to have a positive effect initially, but once people get used to something like a sign, you know, our brain kind of stops paying attention to it. And so we don't usually lean on these as like a first option, but they can be sort of supplemental measure. Say you had like a long, large hill and cushions weren't really going to work. We might slide a feedback sign in there to sort of just help deliver the message as a driver is going down a street. We can also do pavement narrowing. So some streets in Nashville are like much wider than they really need to be. And that in turn makes a driver feel like very comfortable going a little bit faster than we might want them to. So what we can do is stripe a road so that it looks narrower as you're driving, and that just sort of psychologically suggests that maybe you ought to go a little bit slower. That's probably not going to be implemented on Cross Creek, just because if we were to narrow it, it would be by like 6 inches. So it wouldn't really do a whole lot compared to the existing condition. Traffic circles, this probably will not be considered here. Essentially, they work when you have two very wide streets intersecting, and only then you have room to put one of these in and like feel comfortable about left turning movements and such. Both of the intersections that are on either end of Cross Creek are kind of more like a three-way sort of deal. So these wouldn't work quite as well. And then bulb outs and chicanes, this is more kind of on the miscellaneous side. So if you did have a really wide street, I think Fairfax in Hillsborough, West End neighborhood is an example of this being implemented. But essentially it's like narrowing, but you also add some wave in there to slow cars down by just, you know, making them maneuver. And then bulb outs in a similar vein are really intended to kind of shrink the amount of pavement that drivers have to work with, thus forcing them to slow down to, you know, maneuver the turns that they're wanting to do. So that's kind of it on the toolbox. Do y'all have any questions before we move on to sort of what plan we're thinking about for Cross Creek?
Again, I just have a very quick comment. You mentioned about emergency vehicles, and in the last 4 years, you know, I'm sure there's been other times, but I can only think of 2 times that I've seen an emergency vehicle come down our street.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, I want to speak to that. We're on the corner of Cross Creek and Valley Brook, and I have seen more than 1 or 2
Okay.
emergency vehicles. So they do come through.
Okay, well that's fine. We're not really considering tables here, and I think with a road that's as narrow as Cross Creek, cushions basically do the same thing. So we will probably not run into any trouble with emergency services. They're generally just fine with the measures we put in.
Okay.
So if anyone can see my screen, what we're looking at is the map of your street, Cross Creek, that's highlighted in purple. I put a stop sign on Valley Brook that just is indicating that that's where, we all come to a four-way stop if we were turning left or right there. There is no stop sign as Cross Creek turns into Sugar Tree, and there's a crosswalk over here. So that was something that we noticed and kind of flagged for, bearing in mind while we did our design. But basically, besides that, what we're looking at is roughly probably 3 sets of speed cushions. We try to space these out, somewhere between 300 and 500 feet apart. That's the range that's generally shown to have the intended effects of lowering speeds, but without putting down so many that it's having diminishing returns. And usually we have more to talk about, but I'm happy to take any questions, or we can move on if everyone sort of understands what we're looking at here.
I have a question.
Sure.
Our driveway is very close to the intersection of Cross Creek and Valley Brook. And so we deal with people who run the stop signs there at that intersection in trying to
Oh,
get out of our driveway.
yeah. Okay. So they're coming from Valley Brook and just sort of like whipping around the turn.
Well, they get to a place where they think they can see that there's no other cars. And so they just ignore the stop sign and go right on through. Our line of sight is a little limited, and sometimes there have been times when I've tried to pull out of my driveway and had to slam to a stop because all of a sudden a car comes flying through there.
Right.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I know that there's that hill like right as it goes up to Valley Brook, and that certainly wouldn't help the visibility situation.
Would there be any kind of way to have signs on Valley Brook that they are approaching a traffic calming? Because we've been hit because we have to stop right there to turn into our driveway, and we had a driver just fly right around the corner there and hit us in the back end. So would that be something that could be put,
Yeah.
signs?
Could you traffic calm that intersection?
Yeah.
Yes and no. So what we can't do is expand the project onto other streets. That's really just a policy decision. And part of it is because no one from Valley Brook like applied and was considered and all that. We could consider the intersection as, the end of the project and thus eligible for some sort of treatment. It sounds like maybe some bulb out or bulb out like measures could help. So if we went back,
Well, if you could put the speed cushions right there just next to the S on your stop, that would be a big help.
yeah, I wish we could. That's the single place on the entire street that it's actually a little bit too steep for those speed cushions to be. The manufacturer has some criteria that basically they guarantee these will not break, but only under certain circumstances, and that grade threshold was just a little bit too high. There will be signs that say speed cushions ahead, to kind of warn people, so we could put that much closer to the intersection. That would potentially help. But yeah, if people are kind of running this stop sign, I'm wondering if tightening that geometry a little bit to just make it harder to do that maneuver fast might help.
Yeah,
But
I don't think they're kind of not stopping. They're not stopping. And
Yeah,
again,
they're just yeah.
can confirm when we're trying to get out of the driveways in the morning, we might have to wait several minutes before we can pull out.
Got it.
I agree with Rick.
Wow. Okay. Well, it sounds like we probably should do that then. So we'll take that into consideration. I'll make sure that there's no like other issues with it, but it sounds like a good idea if that's you know, a main safety concern for you all.
Okay.
Any other questions about what we're seeing here?
David, this is Lisa Binder, and you may have already said this because I didn't have sound for about 20 minutes, but when is it being proposed that these speed bumps are put in?
Oh, yes. So I have not covered that. It's actually a great segue into the next slide. This is sort of just the overall program flowchart. So application, that happened a long time ago. We sort of covered the prioritization and selection process. This is meeting number 1. So essentially what we're doing is taking feedback, kind of getting a feel for the neighborhood, listening to any ideas that folks may have. We are going to produce a design, like kind of detailed construction plans, and then have meeting 2, and then there will be like an online ballot to vote. So basically meeting 2, that will be us sort of just showing you what we've designed, any kind of updates to the plan. You'll see specifically like where are these going. And then the construction process will begin if the ballot passes. I guess to elaborate on that a little bit, it's an online voting situation, so everyone will get a mailer with a specific code, and you'll follow those instructions and say yes or no. If 2/3 of those that respond favorably, so like 66% yeses, then it will succeed and get into the queue. I will say right now there's a pretty steep backlog on these projects. There was kind of a disruption in the supply of speed cushions for a couple of years in 2020 and 2021, but NDOT was still, you know, wanting to keep this program going. So they're working on building projects from about a year ago right now, and it's looking like it'll probably be between a year and 6 months between saying yes and having them installed.
Okay, so 6 months to a year or 18 months?
Oh, 6 months to a year,
Okay.
and like that's 6 months is probably pretty optimistic. A year is maybe a little pessimistic. They certainly can't like guarantee any particular time just because the main
Right.
holdup is out of their control. But that's sort of roughly the expectation we have.
So David, how long does it take your team to design so we know when maybe the meeting 2 would occur?
Usually that's like a month to 2 months. In this case, we can do it pretty fast. Like I would say roughly in the neighborhood of 2 weeks, we'll be able to reach out and schedule that second meeting.
Okay.
We could do it tonight even, like we're ready to go. So.
Yeah. Well said, Ben. I think we can get 66%. I'll go walk through the door tonight.
Well, so this raises an interesting question. NDOT has revised their manual for the next cycle of meetings to basically make meeting 2 optional for situations like these where pretty much everyone is on board and doesn't really need more questions answered. I think that we'll be fine to do that if you all want to just get the design in your inbox and vote yes or no. Is that something that y'all would be interested in? Or I guess I should ask, is anyone wanting to have a meeting too.
Unless
I guess I have
unless
a
you're
question.
hearing. Sorry, go ahead. Apologies.
I have a question because what if the actual positioning of these cushions is something we want to talk about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's see.
And the reason I say that is because a number of years ago, we had another traffic calming process that we went through, and that's why the intersection of Valley Brook and Cross Creek got reconfigured. A bunch of intersections had stop signs added to them that were not there before, and speed humps were put in on Cross Creek and Valley Brook for a short period of time, and then they were all removed early on a Saturday morning. It was like, somebody with influence said, I don't like these speed humps anymore, get rid of them. And so the city came out and got rid of them.
That is fascinating. Thank you for
And
the context.
part of what happened was the placement of those speed humps allowed cars to literally drive around them in people's yards.
Yes.
So
Great. I'm glad you asked. So I guess a couple things to talk about here. The voting process that we're going to undertake is like a relatively new addition, maybe like the last few years. So I think it probably wasn't in place at the time when a project was installed and then removed. Nowadays, NDOT is very comfortable that if 2/3 of residents vote for speed cushions and a few people don't like them, even if they have a lot of influence, they will leave them there and feel very good about it. So I think that we probably don't need to worry about a repeat of that. I mean, certainly we have neighborhoods that just aren't excited about this and they get enough people to vote no that the project never gets installed in the first place. And then I guess I'll address kind of part two of that question. We now, if we're concerned about people driving around into yards, we'll do one of two things. We can either put the flexible delineators kind of on the edge of the road. That will usually stop people from doing that, but we also will just place signs next to the cushions. And we've not found that if there's a sign like kind of on the side of the road, most people aren't willing to like go all the way around that. I won't say that that never happens anymore. There's definitely people driving on the roads that behave irresponsibly at times.
the configuration of Cross Creek really probably doesn't allow for much of what I just mentioned. Most of what I was talking about was happening on Valley Brook.
Yeah, that
The-
makes a little more sense. I think Valley Brook's a smidge wider and maybe a little bit flatter. If I recall, you'll have some ditches and things kind of on that road frontage. And usually, if there's a ditch, like we don't see people trying to jump around them so much. I guess to address sort of the specific placement, we did go out and do our site visit. So I've sort of personally verified that each of these locations is going to work and work pretty well. So what you're seeing here is a very close approximation to where they'll be. The only caveat is that we'll adjust them to make sure they're not like right next to somebody's driveway. We've got a 15-foot or so threshold, and that just allows anyone to kind of like do a full back out and then drive the other way if that's how they leave without having to mess with a cushion.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question, which I guess is probably outside of the topic, but we notice a lot of 18-wheelers and very heavy construction trucks coming down Cross Creek Road. Is there anything that can be done to control or limit that?
Probably not more than what we're doing here. It is not super comfortable to drive over sets of speed cushions with like a full tractor trailer, or especially like a really heavy vehicle. So they may choose to take another route, hopefully on one of the more arterial type roads. They're designed for this. So like I mentioned, NDOT isn't setting out to divert any traffic by doing this. But we certainly do want to encourage vehicles that shouldn't be, cutting through neighborhoods. We also don't want them to be doing that.
Okay.
Is there anything else that would go into the kind of meeting 1, meeting 2 decision? We're more than happy to have it if anyone would like to, but I don't want to hold y'all up if everyone is wanting to move quickly.
Is there a time limit of voting? When does voting expire after, say, a week? Or
It expires 6 weeks after we believe you got the mail. So what happens is I'll prepare like a mailing list and the ballots and the cards and everything. We send that to a mailing consultant, and we'll just make it due whatever Friday is, like 6 or 7 weeks after that. So the voting cards will have that date on them. So once you get it, you'll know. And 6 weeks we usually find is enough time for anyone who wants to vote to do so. We definitely encourage anyone, if they're motivated to do so, to you kind of remind your neighbors. If you have like a Facebook group, maybe post on it, just sort of spread the word that that's going on. Just because I'm certainly guilty of not checking my mail very well, but it is kind of unfortunately the only way we have to reliably reach the group that we need to reach.
I have a neighbor on this call that will take care of that.
Excellent.
She knows who I'm talking about.
This is Stephanie. I have a question. In terms of who's actually voting on it, is it residents that aren't on Cross Creek that could possibly vote, or is it just the residents where the speed bumps are going?
That's a great question. So it is any owner of a parcel that has property abutting the right of way. So every house and lot that is like touching Cross Creek Road will get a vote. I don't think this is the case for any of these, but if it's like a business, for instance, they would be excluded, or some other use that's not like somebody living there. So it's residents vote, not like, the trying to think the sandwich shop or something that's operating on the next street over. All that is to say, I think there may be a couple addresses like on the edge that might be addressed like Valley Brook or Sugar Tree. If their lot touches Cross Creek, they'll get the mail. But I guess that's that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. I just want to ensure that, well, I can't ensure, but the people that resided that wanted them gone, I just want to make sure that they're not part of the trying to do this. He's trying to do it again.
Yes, I understood. Yeah, and NDOT prefers for the people most affected by the speeding to be the ones deciding. So that's why, or one of the reasons that that policy is in place. It's just, this is y'all street. If 1,000 or 3,000 for that matter, people use it to cut through, they would obviously not be motivated to vote for traffic calming on Cross Creek.
We can thank Waze and the Apple traffic app for the increased traffic.
Exactly.
Yeah, that seems to be a very
Cross
common.
Creek is a crosscut.
Yep.
Hmm.
Well, Cross Creek won a quote unquote contest many years ago for being the favorite cut through of Davidson County. And that was before Waves and any of these other apps.
Yeah.
That's hysterical that it was even like a, I'm guessing that was like a survey or something.
It was on, I think it was the Nashville scene, where they choose a lot of the best of this or that, and we won
Oh,
it.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow, that's funny.
Not to us.
No, yeah, it's funny in a dark way.
Yeah, I
Um,
hear you. I understand.
I think I'm in favor of having meeting number 2, just a short meeting to go ahead and look at the design and push it on through.
that sounds good. What I'll do is get that scheduled with you all. We'll produce that design, and then we'll get it. We'll move on with the process after
Okay.
that. So
Okay.
it'll take a couple weeks longer than it would have, but in the grand scheme of things, not a big deal on a timeline perspective.
Will
Cool.
you
Well,
be reporting? Will you be reporting back on the ballot voting?
no. So what happens with the ballot is everyone receives the mailers in their mailboxes. You'll submit your vote, and then 6 weeks later, like once the ballot closes, we'll count them and publish the results to the website.
Publish. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So it'll be available online, but I don't think actually. I think somebody at NDOT will get with the applicant and the council person and let them know.
Okay.
So there will be some sort of follow up, but not like a huge, neighborhood wide announcement.
Okay.
I probably know the answer to this, but is there any way that signage or something can be done in the interim while this process is going on? And I only ask because there are so many pedestrians walking down Cross Creek going towards Green Hills. And I still don't
Great
understand
question.
why we don't have sidewalks, but somebody's going to get hurt. And I see it all the time.
Yes. The answer to that is not with this project, but I would definitely encourage you, if there's anything like that also on your mind, to submit a hub request, because that will go straight to some NDOT staff. They'll decide what to do about that request, probably do a little bit of analysis. But certainly it's possible to have smaller things like that done. They just don't get done as like a traffic calming project, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
just so you know, I've been in this house for, I guess, 3 years now, and within 6 months, I submitted a hub request because I saw somebody walking their dog who almost got hit. And then I submitted another one a year later, but they just seem to go into the atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm first of all sorry to hear that your experience was not a good one so far. I know that it's been kind of a moving target with Hub. I've also had plenty of things that I thought were pretty reasonable requests not seem to be picked up on, but I know that the city is working pretty hard to make sure that, if there's some revamping to be done, that something gets revamped with Hub, or they would like to focus on customer service. And it's entirely possible that there's not like an easy solution or one that fits into NDOT's sort of typical parameters. Sidewalks, for instance, can be much more time consuming and expensive than even traffic calming. So it's probably on a list, but those are a pretty high bar to get a sidewalk installed.
Yeah.
But all that is to say, it certainly doesn't hurt to let the city know, what you're seeing, and just give them all the information you can to, hopefully get a decision that we'll do something.
How about the possibility of having some police periodically looking at our street and especially around the three-way stop that Mr. Lawrence mentioned, where we have Valley Brook and Cross Creek? That is really, really very difficult.
Yeah, I observed the same while I was out there for even a relatively short period of time. I was pretty shocked at how fast people were going on that road. So NDOT does not really have a lot of tools to like compel police to do anything. Obviously, they're stretched pretty thin. So generally, what we don't see them spending a lot of time like doing speed traps in neighborhoods. But submitting hub requests that specifically call out excessive speeding, that does go to the police department. So I have to think if they get, a number of those, they might be more motivated to check out the area. But what I don't want to do is speak for them because they're not really involved in this program directly.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Do we have anything else?
I was just going to say, you certainly don't want to be a pedestrian walking across the pedestrian crossing right there at all, Sugar Creek and Cross Creek, because you will get run over. You better look left and right. It's crazy.
Yeah, that is definitely unfortunate. I all the time wish that we had a slightly better culture of stopping at crosswalks when folks are using them. But that just is what it is for the time being. So if anyone has questions after this meeting, this is my email. Feel free to reach out. NDOT has a general email address as well. That's manned by like 3 or 4 people, and they kind of just split up requests by region of the city. But you will reach like a real person if you email that. It kind of depends on where you are, who it will be. And there's also a website, TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov. That's where you'll go to vote. That's where you'll go to see the plans once they're ready to be viewed. And it also has a lot of information about the program if anyone's curious about doing kind of a deep dive on all the policies and things like that. Any other final questions or thoughts before we wrap up?
Real quick, I assume that if there are 2 people living in our house, do we each get a vote?
Oh, unfortunately, you do not. It's one
Per
vote
house.
per property.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine. Well, we're in agreement here, but I just was checking.
Yeah, good to know. We do have to kind of filter those out from time to time, but yeah, generally it's all the time one vote per like parcel of land.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Of course. Well, y'all, I really appreciate your time. Again, I'm very pleased with the attendance. It's nice to know that you all are motivated to show up and advocate for a safer street in your neighborhood.
Ben is the leader of the pack, and David, appreciate this. This has been really helpful.
Of course, happy to do it.
Yes,
David, let us know what you need. We're ready to move as fast as you can move. So thank you for your help.
Of course.
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll sign off, but y'all have a good night and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.